The Silver Hall of Oristane had not been opened in 62 years. Maren Hallwick stood behind a tapestry on the upper gallery, one hand pressed flat against the cold stone wall, the other curled against the fabric of her simple gray dress. Below her, the hall blazed with the light of 1,000 hanging lanterns, each one shaped like a wolf's open jaw, each one holding a blue flame that would not go out until the ceremony ended. She had never wanted so badly to be somewhere else. The claiming gala. She should have stayed in the still room. But 4 days ago, Kaylin had stopped coming to her. 4 days of silence. 4 days of wondering whether she had imagined the whole impossible thing. And so she had crept up the servants' stair in the darkness and hidden herself in the gallery, and now she could not look away. Kaylin Draven, heir to the Alpha throne of the Northern Reaches, stood at the center of the raised marble floor below. He wore the ceremonial coat of deep blue and silver braid, fastened across his chest with the wolf head clasp that had been forged for his great-grandfather. Even from this distance, Miren could see the quiet way he held his head, the controlled stillness that everyone in the hall took for strength, and she alone knew was how he stood when he was thinking of something he could not say aloud. For 8 months she had known him. 8 months of a man who should not have noticed her, a nobody with stained hands who smelled of crushed thyme, stopping beneath the medicine house eaves to ask what she was brewing. 8 months of him returning at dusk, again and again, to sit on the low stone bench and ask her questions that no heir to a throne had any reason to ask a healer's apprentice. What had her mother been like? Whether she believed in the old stories, what she dreamed of when the wind came down from the mountains. And one night, in the first week of the dying year, he had taken her hand and pressed her palm to the inside of his wrist, and she had felt it. The pull, the recognition. The thing the old midwives whispered about when they thought no one was listening. The thing that was supposed to be myth. Fated. He had bitten her that night. A soft claiming bite just above her collarbone, hidden beneath the high neckline of her working dress. He had wept into her hair afterward, and he had made her a promise. "I will not let them marry me to anyone else," he had whispered. "Wait for me, Miren. I only need time." She had believed him. Her free hand drifted now to the small swell beneath her apron. A second secret. One she had not yet had the chance to tell him. She had rehearsed the exact sentence she would whisper when he came to her that night, after the ceremony, the way he always came. Only he had not come for 4 nights. And now she understood why. Honored pack, honored kin, honored blood of the Reaches. The voice of Elder Osrin carried up to the gallery, thin and dry as winter grass. The gala begins. Let the chosen Omegas approach. The doors at the far end of the hall opened, and 7 women in white entered in a slow procession. Mirena's throat closed. They were the most beautiful Omegas in 3 provinces. Daughters of high merchant houses, of old warrior bloodlines, of the river clans whose loyalty the crown had been trying to secure for a generation. They walked with the slow certainty of women raised from girlhood for exactly this moment. At the center of them, half a step ahead of the rest, walked Solène Verith. The crowd made a soft sound when they saw her. Not a cheer. Something older. Approval. Seleni's father commanded the shore garrisons. Seleni's mother was the second cousin of the dying queen. Selene herself had never once in her life been told she could not have something she wanted. Miren felt her claiming mark begin to burn. It was not the slow warmth she had grown used to in the week since Kaylin had given it to her. It was sharp, alive, angry, as if the mark itself understood what was about to happen before her mind would let her accept it. She pressed her hand against the fabric over her collarbone. The heat bled through her fingers. Surely he would feel it. Surely he would turn his head. Surely he would look up at the gallery and find her. He did not look up. Kaylin of Draven, Elder Osrin intoned, son of the House of the Long Wound, heir to the throne of the northern reaches. The council has spoken. The treaties are drawn. The omegas of the chosen houses stand before you. Name the one who will stand at your side. Silence. It went on too long. A breath. Another. A third. Maren found herself leaning forward against the tapestry, one hand still pressed to the mark that was now burning, as if it had been touched with a hot coal. She could see Kaelin's face in profile. His jaw was set. His eyes were wrong. She had seen him tired. She had seen him cold with visiting dignitaries. She had seen him laughing beneath the medicine house eaves. She had never, in 8 months, seen his eyes look like that. Empty. As though someone had taken a cloth and wiped all the light out of them. He took a single step forward. The step was wrong too. He did not walk the way he walked. He walked the way a man walks when a hand is pressing between his shoulder blades. I choose, Kaelin said. His voice was flat. Selene of House Werewolf. The hall broke. Not into cheers, not quite. Something heavier. A low collective howl that rolled up from the throats of hundreds of wolves at once and broke against the vaulted ceiling like thunder. Selene Verith lowered her head in practiced grace. Her father's face split open in a smile Maren would remember for the rest of her life. And in the middle of all that noise, Maren Hallwick felt the thing inside her chest that she had been so carefully holding together simply let go. Her claiming mark flared so hot she tasted iron. She doubled over behind the tapestry, one hand clamped to her collarbone, the other locked protectively over her belly. The baby moved, small and startled, and even through her own breaking she felt a second small movement that could not have been the first. 2. There were 2. Through the gap in the tapestry she watched Kaelin lift Selene's hand, watched him bow his head over her knuckles in the old gesture of acceptance. Watched Selene smile the slow, satisfied smile of a woman who had just been given what she had been promised. Kaelin's face showed nothing. He did not look for her. He did not hesitate. He did not even glance toward the gallery where the girl he had sworn was his fated mate was silently, quietly, completely coming apart. Maren backed away from the tapestry. Her shoulders struck a pillar. No one saw her go. No one had seen her come. That had always been the problem. And now, it was the mercy. She ran. Down the servants' stair, through the cold kitchen corridor, into the narrow passage behind the laundry that led to her small room at the bottom of the east wing. She packed with hands that would not stop shaking, a spare gray dress, her mother's bone comb, the leather roll of seeds and dried roots she could not practice her craft without. A single folded letter she had been writing to Kaelin and had never sent. She paused at the tiny window. Outside, the first celebration fires were already being kindled on the frozen courtyard stones. No one in the whole of Oristane knew that the heir's true mate was putting on a traveling cloak and walking out through the back gate with his children growing in her belly. She pressed her fingertips to her lips, then to the frozen glass. "Be well, my love," she whispered. "Be happier than you made me tonight." She pulled her hood up and stepped out into the snow. She did not see the shadow on the roof of the east wing, tall and hunched, moving against the lantern light in a way no servant moved. She did not see the second shadow, lower down, amber eyes lifting suddenly as though something had bitten them from within. And she did not hear, half a mile later from the deep forest beyond the outer wall, the single long howl that rose into the winter sky and broke halfway through, as though something inside the one making it had broken at exactly the same moment. By the time Kaelin Draven reached the east wing, by the time his hands tore open the door of a small room that no longer held anyone, the snow had already begun to fill in the prints of the gray cloak that had walked away into the trees. 4 months later, the village of Briarmoor had almost stopped whispering about the healer at the mill stream. Maren had arrived on the coldest night of the last frost, A widow, she had said, from a coastal town that had burned down. The village elders had studied her face, noted the swell beneath her cloak, and asked no further questions. They had given her the abandoned miller's cottage at the bend of the stream, and Miren had accepted the key and thanked them in a voice so quiet the blacksmith's wife had asked her to repeat herself. She had lived there since. She had answered to Wren. She had stopped flinching at the sound of riding hooves on the village road. The cottage smelled of wood smoke and drying camphor. On a shelf above the hearth sat her bone comb, her leather seed roll, and the single folded letter she had written to Kaelin and never sent. She had not been able to bring herself to burn it. She also had not been able to bring herself to open it again. Spring was trying now to push through the thin crust of winter, and Miren, who had once been a still-room girl who believed in soft promises, was now a woman who had stopped believing in very much at all. Except the thing inside her that would not let her alone. She lay awake most nights with both hands pressed flat against the rising curve of her belly, counting the small private movements beneath her palms. They did not match. They came from two different places, and sometimes, in the deepest hour of the night, they came at once, as if two small lives were speaking to one another in a language that excluded the world. The midwife who came down from the hills to examine her had listened with her wooden horn and lifted her head with an expression of mild astonishment and said nothing. Miren had not asked. She was afraid to ask. "Strong babies," she whispered into the dark. "Strong like your father was. Strong like your father should have been." The mark on her collarbone had never once stopped burning. Among the wolf-born, rejection was a clean knife. The mark an alpha gave in secret was supposed to fade within days of his public choice. Hers had not faded. It had deepened into a bruised silver black that pulsed with her heartbeat. And every night she swore she could feel something pulling against it from very far away, like a thread tugged in a distant room. Sometimes she told herself it was grief playing tricks. Sometimes, late at night, she whispered to the dark that it felt like him, reaching, searching, calling her name in a voice she could not quite hear. False hope was a poison worse than hemlock. She had written that on the inside cover of her workbook in her own hand and underlined it twice. And still, on certain nights, she cried, "Mistress Wren!" The voice at her door on the first warm afternoon of the thaw belonged to Talon, the miller's boy, the only child in Briarmoor who was not afraid of the cottage attic. Miren set down the mortar she was working and wiped her hands. "What is it, pet?" He was breathless. His cheeks were bright. "Traders came," he said. "From Oristane. They've been in the square since noon. They're telling stories." Mirene's fingers went cold around the edge of her apron. "What stories?" "The Alpha Heir," Talon said. "They say he's gone mad." The cottage tilted. She put one hand on the doorframe. "What did you say?" "Mad, mistress. They say he's been riding out for months, burning down whole villages looking for somebody. A woman. Nobody knows who. He's offering 20,000 in silver for anyone who can bring him news of her, and he's got twice that waiting for whoever finds her alive. 20,000 in silver. It was more coin than the entire village of Briarmoor would see in a generation. "Why?" Miren whispered. "They don't know why. The traders said the northern fields are failing. The wolf-born are going wild. Two of his own cousins tried to put him in chains and he almost killed them with his bare hands." Miren stood in her own doorway and felt the world rearrange itself behind her eyes. He was searching for her. She pressed silver into the boy's palm, wrapped the willow tincture his mother had asked for in a scrap of oilcloth, and sent him home with hands that she no longer entirely felt belonged to her. She closed the cottage door. She sat down at the long table. She did not move for a long time. If he had rejected her, he would not be searching. If he had chosen Selene Verith freely, his kingdom would not be burning. If the mark had been severed, hers would not still be alive against her skin, pulsing in time with some far-off drum she had spent 4 months pretending not to hear. Something had been wrong in the Silver Hall that night. Something had been wrong with his eyes. She pressed her fingertips to the darkened bruise above her collarbone and, for the first time in 120 days, let herself feel the answer pressing back. A shape moved at the tree line. Miren's head snapped up. It stood between the two old birches at the edge of her clearing, perfectly still. Then it turned its head, and she understood what it was. Not a dog, not a forest wolf. Something taller in the shoulder, longer in the leg, with the intelligence in the tilt of its ears that belonged only to the wolf-born in their second skin. A second shape stepped out beside the first. Then a third. 4, 5, 6 massive wolves standing at the edge of her garden like a jury. Their eyes were on her cottage. They did not howl. They did not advance. They only waited. And that was almost worse than a charge. The mark on her collarbone did not flare. It detonated. Miren gasped and caught herself against the edge of the table as a wave of heat went through her whole body, not the slow burn she had been living with for 4 months, but a lightning strike, a silent scream of recognition that her body had been saving for this exact moment. The babies went utterly still inside her, as if listening. Against the back of her mind she felt something press, huge and desperate, like a hand flattened against the other side of a door. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no, not yet." She knew, in the way one knows that water is wet, that he was not with them. He was close, closer than he had been in 4 months. But he was not the one at her door. The cottage door shook under a heavy knock. Miren's breath stopped. Wolves did not knock. Wolves in their second skin had no hands, which meant someone in first skin stood on her threshold. A second knock. "Mistress?" A man's voice, low, careful, not a shout. "Mistress, please. I am not going to break this door unless you make me. Open it, and we will speak as 2 people in a room." Miren reached above the hearth and took down the long iron pestle she had sharpened one night when she had stopped being able to sleep. She wrapped her free hand across her belly. She crossed the cottage in 4 steps. She drew the bolt. 3 men stood on the stone step. 2 were built like siege engines, dressed in the dark riding leathers of the Draven household guard, each with a long knife at his hip. They did not look at her. They looked past her, at every place something could come from. The third man stood between them. He was older, his hair the gray of river stone, his beard trimmed close. His face was tired, and his eyes, a deep wolf amber, went through her in a way she had only ever felt one other pair of eyes go through her. "Mistress Hallwick," he said quietly. The name she had not heard spoken aloud in 4 months cut her in half. "I am Valar Thrune, second of the Draven household. I have been looking for you since the night you walked out of the East Wing in a gray cloak. May I come in?" It was not a question. Miren stepped back. Valar entered alone. He took in her cottage with one slow sweep: the drying herbs, the neat jars, the narrow bed, the letter on the high shelf. His eyes stopped on the letter for a heartbeat. Then he looked at her. "He did not choose her," Valar said. The pestle slipped a little in her hand. She tightened her grip. "I beg your pardon?" "Solen Verith. He did not choose her of his own will. He was made to." The cottage made a sound around her, a small shifting of timber in the wind, and Miren heard it very clearly because everything else had gone silent. "Sit down, mistress," Valar said gently. "Please. You are carrying, and what I am going to tell you is going to put you on the floor if you do not sit." She sat. "There was a binding sigil," he said, "painted in salt and blood on the underside of the Silver Hall's main doorway. He walked through it, going in. Any man of our blood, walking under a sigil of the old binding, loses the part of himself that knows his own wolf. He becomes pliant, a puppet in a shape no one has learned how to detect. We did not find the sigil for 3 days. By the time we scraped it from the stone, he had already woken next to a woman he had no memory of touching, and he had already begun tearing the household apart looking for you. He has not slept in 4 months, mistress. He trusts only 6 of us now, and 3 of them are currently in your tree line, because he does not trust his own judgment enough to come to this door himself until he knows you will open it. Miren was not aware she was crying until a tear struck the back of her hand. A sigil, she whispered. Yes, and the one who painted it. Valor's face was still. House Verith. The name made the room too small to breathe in. Solène, her father. Both. And others. Valor reached inside his coat and withdrew a folded square of heavy paper, sealed once and broken. This was intercepted 11 days ago by a courier of ours. The seal is Verith. Read it when you are ready. Miren took the paper with fingers that did not feel like hers. The writing inside was small and sharp and brief. The false mate has been located in the Mill Country. The matter will be closed before the next moon. Long reign Queen Solène. Miren looked up. Her mouth was dry. Assassins, she said. Yes, mistress. How close? Valor Thrune tilted his head slightly, as if listening. Outside, beyond the garden, very far away, a long cry went up from the forest. Not a wolf. Something that wanted to sound like a wolf. The kind of sound paid men made when they had crossed the last line of trees and wanted one another to know the target was in sight. Valor's eyes went dark. Now, mistress, he said. The first arrow came through the window before Miren could draw breath to answer him. The arrow buried itself 2 fingers deep in the post beside Miren's head, and the black oil on its barbs was already smoking. Valor Thrune moved faster than a man of his age had any right to move. He seized her by the shoulders and threw her down behind the long table, hard enough that her hips struck the floor, and her arms went around her belly of their own accord to take the blow for the children. A second arrow came through the window and struck the iron pot hanging above the hearth with a flat, ringing sound. A third buried itself in the loaf of bread on the sideboard, and the bread sizzled where the poison touched it. The 2 guards at her step were already moving. She saw the nearest one go down on one knee, and in the space between one breath and the next, the man was gone, and a brindled wolf was launching itself through the open doorway. The second guard shifted in the doorway itself and was gone. Stay down, Valor snapped. They'll kill you. They'll try. He pressed something cold into her palm, a small silver-edged blade, double-hilted. If one of them gets through me, open its throat. The edge is silvered. It will bite through a second skin, the way a razor bites through paper. Yes. Do not come out of this cottage. Do not. Then he, too, was gone, the shape of him pouring down into something wider and lower as the old wolf he became crossed her threshold in a single bound. Miren pressed herself flat against the underside of the table. Outside she heard the first snarl of real fighting, and beneath it, farther off, the calm professional voices of men giving orders. She heard the twang of another crossbow and then a cry that was short and final, and not Valor's. A fourth arrow came through the window. This one did not strike wood. It struck her right forearm, where she had lifted it across her belly, and the black oil hissed against her skin as the head sank in. She screamed. The pain went through her like a rope of fire, up the arm and into her chest and down into the mark on her collarbone, and the mark answered it. She felt something break open in her that she had spent her whole life being told to keep shut. Her hands, clutched against the wood of the table, began to glow. Not gold. Not the warm healer's gold her old mistress had shown her once in the candlelight when she was a child. This was a cold, pale green, the color of the first light before a storm, the color of marsh fire. It climbed up her arms to the elbows. The barb in her forearm pushed itself out of the wound on its own, the black oil running off her skin in slow beads and dying in the air before it hit the floor. Her old mistress, dead these 6 years, had made her swear never to let anyone see this. A marshlight healer does not heal like the gold ones heal, the old woman had whispered. A marshlight healer takes the wound into herself and eats it. If they find out what you are, child, they will burn you. She had sworn. She had spent years pressing this part of herself down into the dark at the bottom of her so hard she had half forgotten it was there. She was done pressing it down. Maren pushed herself up onto her knees behind the table. She raised her glowing hands and she laid them flat against the curve of her belly, and the pale green light poured into the children, and she felt them both go quiet and warm and safe, in a way they had not been warm and safe since she had walked out of Orestein in a gray cloak. Then she stood up. She stepped out of her own front door in her bare feet. The world outside had become a killing ground. 3 of the Draven wolves were already down in the trampled snow, one of them still breathing in long wet shudders. Veilor, in second skin, was fighting 2 men in black at the edge of the herb beds, and he was bleeding from the shoulder and from a long line across his flank. A 4th figure in black, smaller than the others, stood between the birches with a loaded crossbow braced against her hip, and her face hidden behind a hammered iron mask shaped like a running hare. The hare turned toward Maren. "Well," said a woman's voice from inside the mask, "look what the light brought out." The crossbow lifted. Maren raised her glowing hands. She had only been told once, in the dark, that marshlight could not only heal, that in the old days, before the golden healers had driven them out of the towns, the marshlight witches had walked onto battlefields and taken the hurt of 100 men into themselves and pushed it back out again, and the men who had wounded those 100 had died where they stood. She opened her hands. The pale green light left her in a slow exhale and rolled across the trampled snow toward the hair-masked woman and the 2 men fighting Veilor. It touched them at the feet first. One of the men in black dropped his sword and screamed. The other seized his own chest and went to his knees. The hair-masked woman fired her crossbow anyway, and Maren felt the bolt strike her in the hip, and she did not stop. The light went on rolling. The hair-masked woman dropped to her knees in the snow and began to make a long, low noise of something inside her being pulled out. Then the tree line exploded. A shape came through the birches the way weather comes through a broken window. It was bigger than any wolf Maren had ever seen, the deep blue-black of a starless sky, the muscles under its coat rolling like ocean swell. It crossed the clearing in 2 bounds. It took the hair-masked woman by the shoulder with its jaws, lifted her bodily off the ground, and threw her. Her body struck a birch trunk and did not move again. The great wolf turned in a slow circle, teeth bared, eyes burning the color of old amber coals. Then those eyes found Maren. The whole clearing stopped making sound. Mirene's marshlight was still around her hands, pale and slow. She was standing in her own front garden in bare feet in the melting snow, bleeding, glowing, with her fingers spread across the hidden curve of her belly, and the wolf that had spent 4 months tearing the northern reaches apart to find her was walking toward her 1 careful step at a time. He stopped at arm's reach. He lowered his enormous head, and he pressed the blunt of his muzzle with the gentleness of a man laying a cheek against a newborn, against the swell of her stomach. The children moved, both of them, once each. Small, deliberate, as if they were saying hello. The great wolf made a sound she had not known a wolf could make, a soft broken thing more like a grown man weeping than any wolf cry, and then the air around him shivered, and the wolf was no longer there. Kaelin Draven knelt in the wet snow at her feet. He was thinner than she remembered. The skin beneath his eyes was bruised as though he had not slept since the night in the Silver Hall. His hands hovered on either side of her belly as if he did not believe he was allowed to touch what was inside it. Blood from some earlier fight, not hers, was drying at his temple. "May I?" he finally said. His voice was not a voice she knew. May I, Miren? Please. She could not answer. She took his wrist in her unbloodied hand, and she brought his palm, very slowly, to the place beneath which his children were alive. Kaelin Draven, heir to the Alpha throne of the Northern Reaches, the man who had walked in 4 months from a ceremonial hall into a legend about a madman on horseback burning the woods, pressed his forehead against Mirani's belly and broke. He wept into the fabric of her gray dress without shame and without sound, and around them in the trampled clearing the last of the assassins were fleeing into the trees, and his wolves were closing the circle, and Valor Thrune, bleeding and upright, had the grace to turn his face away. Miren laid one hand, still glowing faintly pale green, on the crown of Kaelin's dark head. "You came," she whispered. "I will always come," he said into her dress. "I will always, always come." Miren had imagined this moment more times than she would ever admit aloud. In the long nights at Briarmoor, with her hands on her belly and the mark burning under her collarbone, she had pictured 100 different versions of it. Kaelin in a rage. Kaelin cold as frost, demanding she return his children and disappear. Kaelin, at the head of a column of household guards, come to drag her back in irons for the crime of being inconvenient. She had never once imagined him crying into the front of her dress while his own blood dried on his face. For a long moment she simply let it happen. She kept her marshlight faint hand on the crown of his dark head, and she let the man who had broken her heart 4 months ago break himself against her belly in the wet snow. The babies shifted inside her, small and curious. Then the warmth began to cool, and the cold came back, and Mireni stepped away from him. Kaelin's head came up as if she had struck him. "Miren, get up," she said. "Miren, please. I cannot begin to tell you what I have been. Get up. You are kneeling in snow. You will take a fever and I will have to heal you, and I do not want to touch you yet." He rose slowly, the way a man rises from prayer. "Valor told me," she said. Her voice came out steady. "About the sigil, about the Verith, about what was done to you. I believe him." "Then come here." "No." The word cracked out of her like the iron pestle hitting the pot, and Kaelin went very still. "I believe what was done to you. I believe you did not know your own feet when they carried you forward on that floor. I believe every word Valor said about the nights you have not slept, and the food you have not eaten, and the cousins you almost killed. And I need you to stand there and hear me, Kaelin Draven, because if you do not hear me now, I will never say it again. And we will carry it between us into whatever life we are about to have, and it will rot. I am hearing you." I sat behind a tapestry in that gallery for the better part of an hour. He flinched. "I watched you walk. I watched your eyes. I thought, for 1 whole hour, that I had been the worst kind of fool a woman can be. That I had let a man touch me under the eaves of a medicine house and put his teeth on me and whisper things I had been stupid enough to believe, and then I had watched him do exactly what a girl with no name should have known a man of his house would always do. I walked out of Oristane with your children inside me, and a letter I never sent in the bottom of my bag. Do you understand what I am telling you? Yes. I do not think you do. What was done to you was done in a single night. What you did to me, without knowing, went on for 120 nights. I did not know about the sigil. I did not know anything except that you had chosen another woman in front of a hall full of people. For 4 months, Kaelin, I lived inside a version of you who did not love me. I got used to that man. I started building a whole life around the idea of him." A sound left Kaelin's throat, low and hurt. "Do not interrupt me." He closed his mouth. "I need you to know," she said. And here, at last, her voice thinned. "That even when I believed the worst of you, I could not stop feeling you. Every single night for 120 nights, the mark you put on me burned as if you had set a fresh coal against it, and I spent half of that time hating myself for the fact that my body would not stop waiting for a man who had chosen someone else. I do not know how to forgive you for being the reason I went on wanting you anyway. Kalen closed the distance between them in 2 steps. He did not touch her. He stopped half an arm's length away, and he held his hands out at his sides as if to prove he was not reaching. I did not feel you for 3 days, he said. Those were the 3 days the sigil held. When it let me go, I woke up in my own bed with a woman in it I did not recognize, and the first thing I did was reach for you through the mark. And you were gone. I thought I had killed you. I tore that house apart on my hands and knees looking for a body. And then Valor found your room empty, and your comb missing, and I understood. You had walked out because you thought I had done it on purpose. He swallowed. I would have preferred the body. Do not say that. A dead woman I could have carried. A living woman who believed I betrayed her is a thing I have not slept through one single night of. I have ridden my own wolves into the ground trying to outrun what I was feeling. And the one thing that kept me a man and not an animal was that your mark did not fade. Every night I put my hand on mine and yours pulsed back, and I knew you were alive. And I knew some piece of you had not stopped being mine. The tears she had not let fall in the gallery 4 months ago fell now. I did not stop being yours, she whispered. I only stopped letting myself feel it. Let yourself feel it. She raised her face. He was not touching her. He was waiting. He had always, even on the stone bench under the eaves of the medicine house, been a man who waited. Miren stepped forward and put her forehead against his chest. The mark on her collarbone went white hot. She felt his whole body shudder once under her, and then, for the first time since the Silver Hall, she let the bond open. She simply stopped holding the door closed with her shoulder, and everything he had been carrying for 120 nights poured through her all at once. Terror, specific. The image of a gray cloak disappearing into a snow-smothered tree line. Fury, ancient, older than him. A hollow under the breastbone shaped exactly like her. 1,000 small moments of him sitting alone in his chambers at midnight with one hand on his own mark, whispering her name to see whether she would answer. And under all of it, steady as the turning of a millstone, the thing he had never said to her aloud and had not stopped feeling for a single hour. Miren made a small broken sound into his coat. Kalen's arms finally closed around her. I know, he whispered into her hair. I know. I know. I know. When at last she drew back, Kalen's hands were already at her hip, feeling through the blood-stiff fabric of her dress for the shaft of the crossbow bolt. He drew it out of her in one clean motion. The marshlight came up of its own accord and closed the wound beneath his palm as smoothly as water closing over a dropped stone. Better, he murmured and pressed his mouth to her forehead. Valor Thrun was standing a respectful 12 paces away with his hands folded in front of him. The assassins in the clearing had been rolled onto their backs, and the hair-masked woman had been uncovered. And Miren saw, without surprise, the face beneath the iron mask. Who is it? Kalen said without turning. Isolde Verith, Valor said. Solen's cousin on the waterside. Kalen closed his eyes. Then it is open war. It was open war 4 months ago, my lord. We only did not know it. Kalen turned Miren gently and looked down into her face. The blood at his temple had dried and his eyes had come back. They were the eyes she knew. Tired. Honest. His. Ride with me to Oristane, he said. Not as servant. Not as secret. As the one I should have named in that hall. We end the Verith tonight. Tonight, she repeated. Tonight. She looked down at the small swell of her belly between them, at the man who had wept into her dress and then stood and waited while she said the things she needed to say. Together, she said. Kalen pressed his forehead to hers, and the bond between them, no longer a door held shut, settled into a quiet, live thing that would never again pretend to be anything else. Together, he agreed. The ride back to Oristane should have taken the better part of 2 days. Kalen's wolves cut the time in half. Muren rode in front of him on a tall gray mare whose coat steamed in the cold air. His arm was wrapped across her chest, just beneath the mark, and his other hand lay flat and warm over the swell of her belly as if he could not bear not to feel the children under his palm. She had argued when Valor had first lifted her into the saddle that she was perfectly capable of riding her own horse. Kalen had looked at her with a stubbornness that went below the level of reason, and had simply swung up behind her and closed his arm around her. "My wolf will not tolerate air between us," he had said, low into her ear. "You will have to forgive me for it. I will forgive you for worse than that." They rode through the last thaw and into the first true night of spring. Around them, dark shapes moved between the trees, keeping pace at a distance that never closed and never lengthened. Valor had taken the second skin himself, and his amber eyes, she knew, never stopped watching the road ahead. For the first hour, neither of them spoke. Then, because the bond was open between them now, and because some of the things pressing against her ribcage were not words she could hold back any longer, Muren leaned her head against his shoulder and said, "Tell me." "Which part?" "All of it. From the moment the sigil let you go." So he told her. He told her how he had woken with his mouth tasting of metal, and Selene Verith asleep on the pillow beside him. How he had put her out of his rooms in her nightdress and barred the door from the inside. How he had put his fist through a wardrobe and his reflection in the long mirror, and neither had made him feel any better. He told her about the 3 days afterward when he had not been certain he was sane, the way his wolf had howled inside his skull every time he closed his eyes, the way his own household had begun to step out of his path in the corridors. He told her about the first month of searching, how he had ridden himself and his wolves into the ground in a widening circle, because the bond in his chest would keep pulsing, and he would turn his horse toward it, and it would fade before he got anywhere near. He had not understood that the bond was not pointing at her. It was only telling him she was still alive. The pointing had come later, when the children began to move, and he had not known that was what the new pull meant. "The children pulled you," Muren said softly. "The children pulled me. I thought I was going mad. The old healers will tell you a severed bond leaves a hollow, and I had a hollow. But something in the hollow was tugging in a direction the bond had never tugged before. I did not understand for a long time that I was being led to my own blood." "They are very strong," she whispered, and laid her hand over his on her belly. "Both of them. They have been very strong the whole way." "Kalen." "Yes. I dreamed of you." He went still. Every night. For 4 months. They did not feel the way my other dreams feel. I would wake with my pillow wet and the mark burning and the exact shape of something you had said to me still in my mouth. What did I say to you? You told me to wait. You told me you were looking, that I was to keep the baby safe, and you would come, even if it took a year. Over and over. I said those things out loud, he said, in my chambers, at 3 and 4 in the morning, with my hand on my mark, and I would tell myself I was talking to the air. Because any man who believes he is reaching another person across a broken bond is a man his own household should have in chains. You were reaching me. I was reaching you. She closed her eyes and let the mare carry them forward through the dark. When Kalen spoke again, his voice had roughened. "I would like, when this is finished, to show you the rooms I had begun to prepare. I had only known for a month that you must still be alive. I had a small set of rooms readied beside mine, with 3 doors that lock from the inside. The walls I had hung with the dark green you liked. The bed is wide enough for 4. I did not know why I needed a bed wide enough for four. You know now. I know now. She turned in the saddle and tilted her face up to him, and Kalen bent his head and kissed her for the first time in 120 days. The bond, already open, went white. Every small private thing that had stayed politely to itself since she had let him into her came surging forward at once. His grief, her anger, his protectiveness like a wall of flame, her relief, shameful and overwhelming, at not having to be alone inside her own body anymore. The twin small presences inside her, suddenly aware that their father was close, reached out to him in a way that was not touch and not voice, but the warm, wordless insistence of two small lives announcing themselves to the third that belonged to them. When they broke apart, they were both shaking. Soon, Kalen said, hoarse, when the Verith are finished, I will seal this properly. Yes, she whispered, soon. They crested the ridge above Oristane in the last violet hour before dawn. The city spread out below them, the long black roofs running down to the river, the spires of the ancestral hall catching the first gray light. For a heartbeat, she thought how strange it was to be looking at it again, as herself, in a saddle, with his arm around her. Then she felt Kalen go rigid behind her. No, he said. Valor, still in second skin, was already at the mare's knee, a low warning rumble in his chest. Miren looked again, and this time she saw what they had seen. Smoke. 3 columns of it, black and thick, rising from 3 different districts near the inner wall. The great banner above the east tower was not the blue and silver wolf of House Draven. It was a flat white cloth bearing a deep green rising wave, the sigil of House Verith. They would not have dared, Kalen said. They have dared, Mireni said. A rider burst out of the lower gate of the city at a dead gallop. He half fell out of his saddle at the sight of his lord. My lord. They moved at midnight. Seleni's uncle. 3 of the old captains of the shore garrison. They took the ancestral hall before sunrise. Lord Verith has declared himself regent in your name, and Selene has been put on the inner chair in a white dress. They are saying you were overtaken by grief and have gone into the woods to die. How many of our household are inside? They have taken hostages. 42. Kitchen staff, stable staff, 3 of the old healers, the door wardens who refused to stand aside. The scout's voice broke. And Mistress Andra. They took Mistress Andra. Mirena's breath stopped. Andra, the old kitchen mistress, the woman who, on 4 separate nights in the first weeks Kalen had come to the medicine house, had found Miren in the passage with her hair undone and her lips bruised, and had simply pressed a warm honey roll into her hand and walked past her without a word. Andra, who had known. They are to be executed at noon, the scout said, unless you ride into the keep alone and unarmed and submit to the regent's authority. The kitchen mistress is to be the first. Kalen's arm tightened across Mireni's chest until she could feel his heart hammering against her back. Noon, he said softly. Noon, my lord. He looked down at Miren, and she saw, in his amber eyes, the calm, specific kind of fury a man wears when he has finally understood that every door he has to break will be opened by his own hand. Miren. I am not hiding, she said, before he could ask it. Do not ask me to. He closed his eyes for one long breath. Then he opened them, and the air of the northern reaches turned his mare toward the city that had been stolen from him while he was kneeling in a garden 4 months too late. The taking of Oristane was neither long nor clean. Kalen sent Miren to a stone barn on the far side of the lower mill, with 4 of his wolves around her and Valor in first skin at her side. She did not argue. She only asked him, before he left her, to come back alive, and he had pressed his forehead to hers and promised without opening his mouth. Then he had turned his wolves loose on the city. From the barn door, Miren watched the outer gate split inward under the weight of a black wave of fur. She watched the smoke from the 3 burning districts thicken and then thin again, as loyal hands inside the walls found themselves joined by loyal jaws outside. She watched the Verith green and white banner hauled down from the east tower. She listened to the bells of the ancestral hall ring in a pattern she did not know, and Valor told her quietly that it meant the keep doors were being held from the inside. "They have barricaded," he said. "Lord Verith has pulled everyone behind the inner gate. He will be in the ancestral hall itself by now, with the hostages." "How long?" "An hour, perhaps less." She put a hand against the rough wood of the barn door frame. The marshlight had not come back to her fingers since the fight at the cottage. She did not know whether it would come when she asked it to. An hour later, a runner came. "My lord has taken the outer keep," the boy panted. "The Verith have shut themselves in the ancestral hall with the hostages. Lord Verith has sent word through the door. If my lord does not surrender himself unarmed and in first skin, by noon he will take the hostages one at a time. The old kitchen mistress is to be first. My lord bids you stay where you are. My lord says he is considering his answer." Miren looked at Valor. Valor had been a second of a great household for 31 years. He had the face of a man who had learned, long ago, to hide what he thought. He was not quite hiding it now. "You will not tell him I went," she said. "Mistress, you will not tell him. By the time he knows, it will be too late for him to stop me. I require you to give me the quarter of an hour I need to walk across this city and put myself in the ancestral hall before him. Mistress, I serve him. You serve the house. I am the house now. I am carrying it. Look at me and tell me I am not." Valor looked at her for a long moment. He simply shifted one of his short blades from his right hand to his left and opened the barn door. "At the side gate of the ancestral hall, ask for Captain Harrow. He is ours. He will get you through the small door. After that, mistress, you are alone, and so am I, because when my lord learns what I have done, he will have my throat. He will not. He will consider it. Then I will heal it for you afterward." Valor Thrune, for the first and only time in the whole of his service, smiled at her. "Go," he said. Miren went. The walk across Oristane took 13 minutes. She did not run. She kept her hood up. She passed through a market square where bodies had been laid in a row under a single tarp, and she did not stop. At the side gate of the ancestral hall, a tall officer with a split lip and a blue and silver cord at his shoulder looked at her once and walked her through the small door. Inside, in the long stone corridor, Miren pushed back her hood. "Tell them that the mate of the heir of the northern reaches is here. Tell them she has come alone, unarmed, and she has an offer for the regent." Captain Harrow looked at her for a heartbeat longer than his training allowed, then turned on his heel and went down the corridor. He came back less than a minute later. "The regent says you may enter. Alone." "Good," she said. She put one hand, briefly, on the curve of her belly, and she opened the great oak doors of the ancestral hall of Oristane. The first thing she saw was 42 people kneeling in 2 long rows between the pillars, wrists bound, Verith guards at their backs with drawn blades. She found Andra almost at once, second from the end on the left. Andra's eyes met hers and widened, and then, deliberately, Andra looked at the floor as if to say, "Child, do not make this about me." The second thing she saw was the inner chair. Selena Verith sat in it, dressed in a hasty high-necked white gown. She did not look like a bride. She looked like a woman who had not slept. Beside the chair stood her uncle, Lord Idreth Verith. And at Idreth's elbow, one hand on the pommel of a long thin blade whose blue-black sheen Miren recognized with a thud of sickness, stood Selene's father, old Lord Cadron Verith, Wolfsilver, forged black at the old river forges, the only metal in the reaches that could kill a wolf born in one cut, on either side of the change. "So," Idrith said, in a voice of careful amusement. This is the still-room girl. This is the still-room girl, Mirena said. Solène was staring at her belly. I came to make an exchange. You have 42 of his household. I am the one thing he wants more than any of them. Let them go. Take me. Idrith looked at his brother. Old Cadron did not move. His eyes were on her belly, the way a butcher's eyes sit on a carcass. Father, Solène said, her voice cracking at the edge. Father, just kill her. Hush, child. She is carrying his children. Kill her now. I said hush. It was the shortness in his voice that told Mirene what she needed to know. Old Cadron Vareth did not love his daughter. She had been a piece of him he had moved across a board for a long time, and this morning, with the city in flames and his brother's voice going thinner by the hour, he had begun to understand that the peace had not been worth the game. Idrith cleared his throat. The offer is accepted. Release the hostages. Old Cadron nodded once, without taking his eyes from Mirena's belly, and the ropes were cut. Andra did not move. Two of the younger kitchen girls tried to pull her. The old woman planted herself and would not rise. Child, she said in a voice that carried. Child. No. Andra. I watched you bring him honey rolls under my own roof. I am not walking out of this hall while you walk into that chair. You are. You are going to walk out of this hall because I need you to walk out of it. Find him, Andra. Tell him where I am. Andra's face crumpled. Go, Mirene said. Two of the younger women took Andra under the elbows and drew her, weeping, through the great oak doors. The last of the 42 went with them. The doors shut. Mirene stood alone in the center of the ancestral hall of Orriston, with old Cadron Vareth and his thin black blade and his brother and his daughter on the high step, and she put both of her hands over the curve of her belly, and she breathed out. The marshlight did not come to her fingers. It came up from inside her. She had not known until that moment that it could do that. The pale green rose in her from somewhere below her heart, somewhere she had never been able to reach on her own, and she understood, with a clarity that was not hers alone, that what was rising in her was being lent to her. Two small presences, curled against each other under her hands, were quietly and deliberately opening themselves and pushing their own light up into her body to use. Her children were giving her what she needed. Mirene let out a small breath of something that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. Old Cadron Vareth saw the light climb up into her throat and his face went white. What is she? He said. I am the one you should not have threatened, Mirene said. She did not know she had shifted until the light burst out of her skin. Bones she had carried her whole life in one shape began to carry her in another. The pain was enormous and it was brief, and under it she felt the two small lights inside her folding themselves carefully, deliberately, into the safe place under her new ribs. Her gray dress fell away from her in pieces. Her hair lengthened and darkened and then lifted, not as hair, as a thick silver-black pelt shot through with the faint pale green of the light that had come up out of her chest. She stood on 4 paws in the center of the ancestral hall of Orriston, taller at the shoulder than any wolf the Vareth had ever seen, and the marshlight in her coat was not something any of them had ever read about in any book. The great oak doors behind her exploded off their hinges. Kaelin Draven, in second skin, came through them without slowing. The ancestral hall of Orriston had stood for 4 centuries. Not one thing inside it had ever been prepared for what came through its door that morning. Kaelin in second skin was a shadow the shape of an avalanche, and he crossed the length of the hall between one breath and the next. Mirene, lower at the shoulder than him, silver-black and faintly green, turned in a half-circle to place herself between him and the marble pillars, where the last Vareth guards were raising blades they already knew would not be enough. Old Cadron Vareth stepped down from the high step with the thin black wolf-silver blade in a 2-handed grip. He did not aim it at Kaelin. He aimed it at Miren. She understood what he intended. He could not kill the alpha heir. But he could still kill the one thing the heir could not afford to lose. And an empire ruled by a broken alpha was an empire the Verith could carve into pieces at their leisure. He lunged. Miren did not move back. She moved forward. The wolf silver cut her across the left shoulder, and she felt the bite of it in a way she had never felt any wound before. A bright, cold, bone-deep pain that tried to crawl up into her chest and stop her heart. But the marsh light was in her, and the twins were in her. And the three lights together were not something a single man with a single blade could bleed out of her in one cut. She pulled the black wolf silver poison from the edge of the blade into her own body, and then, before old Cadron could lift the blade again, she pushed it back out of her through her teeth and into him. The old lord opened his mouth to scream. No sound came out of it. He fell to his knees at her feet, and his hand went slack, and the blade rang against the ancestral stones. By the time his body settled sideways onto the high step, it was already the body of a man who had been dead for several breaths. Idrith Verith dropped his sword and ran. He did not reach the side door. Kaelin's second skin caught him halfway across the floor, lifted him without effort, and set him down on his knees in the center of the hall. Kaelin did not kill him. Idrith would be needed for a public accounting, and would name every conspirator in the binding before the week was out. Selene had not moved from the inner chair. She sat in her hasty white gown, and her face was the face of a woman watching her own family burn down around her, and understanding, at last, that no one had ever built it to last past her usefulness. She looked at her father's body. She looked at her uncle on his knees. Then her eyes rose to Kaelin's wolf, and something in her crumpled. "Let me go," she said. It was not a command. It was not even a plea. It was a small, exhausted thing, said by a woman who had been a piece on a board from the moment she had been born, and was finally, in the wreck of the hall, becoming aware of the fact. Kaelin's wolf bared its teeth. Miren shifted. The change back was easier than the change out had been, because the twins were still folded carefully into the safe place under her ribs as her bones resorted. Velor, through a door she had not seen him open, was already there with a long dark cloak over his arm, and without looking at her face he draped it across her shoulders. Miren pulled the cloak closed over her belly. She walked up the high step past old Cadran's body and stopped in front of the inner chair. Selene Verith. Yes. You will be stripped of your house name before the moon rises. I know. You will be taken north of the pass. The pack there does not keep the old blood rules. They will give you a plain name and a plain trade. You will not sit any chair again. You will not come south of the pass for the rest of your natural life. Do you understand me? Selene's eyes closed. Yes, she whispered. Say the word, Mirena said gently, and I will ask him to kill you instead. I will not make you live a life you do not want. Selene's eyes opened. For the first time since Miren had seen her walking at the center of the seven in the Silver Hall, Selene Verith looked at her like a person and not like an obstacle. I want the life, Selene said. Then you have it. Miren turned away from the chair and did not look at her again. Kaelin was already shifting. By the time Miren reached him, he was a man in blood-spattered leathers, amber eyes fixed on the cut in her shoulder that had not yet closed itself. He only lifted her hand and pressed his mouth against the inside of her wrist, and the bond between them tightened down to a single live wire running from her heart to his. Not here, he said into her skin. No, she agreed. He carried her out of the ancestral hall with her cloak closed over the small heavy swell of their children. They did not finish the bond in a great hall. They finished it in the small set of rooms Kaelin had unknowingly built for her, with the east window, the green walls, the bed wide enough for four. Andra herself drew the bath. She did not weep this time. She was past weeping. She washed the blood and the ash and the last of the wolf-silver residue out of Miren's hair with the unhurried hands of a woman who had handled the bodies of Draven brides for 40 years, and she did not speak until Miren was dry and wrapped in soft dark green and seated on the edge of the bed. Child. Yes, Andra. I knew. I want you to hear me say it. I knew from the third honey roll. I would have carried it to my grave if the Verith had not brought me up into that hall. I understand you? Good. Then I will go and sit outside the door. I will not come in again unless the house is on fire. She kissed the crown of Miren's head, and she went. Kalen came in a few minutes later. He had been washed as well. His hair was still damp. The long cut at his temple had been dressed. When he looked at her sitting on the edge of the wide bed in the green room, his face did the thing it had done beneath the medicine house eaves, a quiet, unguarded softening that belonged only to her. He crossed the room and knelt at her feet. Not as a penitent this time, as a man paying a private debt. He laid his head against her belly and stayed there for a long time, and the twins came up to meet him, both at once, small and deliberate. Come up here, Miren whispered. He rose. She loosened the neck of her robe and drew it aside, and the mark he had given her under the eaves of the medicine house 8 months and 120 nights ago lay there in the lamplight, dark silver against her skin, alive and waiting. Complete it, she said. Only, he said, if you will take mine afterward. I will not be claimed without claiming. I know that. Come here. Kalen bent his head and set his teeth, very gently, over the mark he had already given her. He did not break the skin. He only pressed steadily until the mark beneath his mouth began to answer, and when it had answered enough, he bit down. Everything opened. Miren had thought the bond was open before. It had not been. What had been open before was a door. What opened now was the house behind the door. Every memory Kalen had kept in the private rooms of himself came spilling into her in a slow, steady flood. She saw his mother's face, tired and thin on a pillow, the last night of her life. She saw the first wolf he had ever killed at the age of 14, and felt the shame he still carried for having done it badly. She saw herself through his eyes across a medicine house bench, and the version of her he had been carrying was a woman with a quiet dignity he had never learned to match and had been, in his own clumsy way, trying to study. She saw the 4 days before the Silver Hall, when the binding sigil had begun to work on him in small increments, and he had not understood why he was too tired to come down the east corridor to see her. The sigil had kept him away from her on purpose, because if he had come, the mark would have flared, and a flared mark would have burned the sigil clean off him in an afternoon. She saw, at last, that he had not stopped for a single hour being hers. When he released her mark, she was weeping without sound. She leaned forward and set her own teeth, carefully, at the joint of his neck and shoulder. "This will hurt," she whispered. "Good," he said. She bit down. The mark she laid on him was not the mark he had laid on her. Hers carried marshlight. The pale green worked itself into the new silver scar at the moment she broke the skin, and she felt him shudder under her mouth with the bright, strange pain of a claiming that was not a wolf's claim alone. Through the completed bond, she gave back to him everything he had just given to her. Her grandmother's hands braiding her hair as a child. Her old mistress's dying whisper. The first time she had seen him walk past the medicine house door and had turned her face away and pretended she had not. The letter on her shelf in Briarmoor. The night she had known she was carrying not one child but 2, and had pressed her face against her pillow and said his name to the dark. The bond sealed. It did not feel like a door closing. It felt like a house settling. When at last she drew back, Kalen put his forehead to hers and did not try to speak. Outside, across Oristane, the bells began to ring. Spring came slow to the northern reaches that year, but the fields took. The 3 burned districts of Oristane were rebuilt, stone by stone. The Verith name was struck from the inner register of the Reaches. Idreth made his public accounting and was put to the sword. Solen crossed the northern pass with a plain cloak and a plain trade, and was not heard of again. The children came in late summer. A boy first, dark-haired and quiet, with his father's steady amber eyes. A girl half an hour after, smaller, silver-black in the light that took the late afternoon into the east window, with eyes already the color of pale river moss. When she was 6 weeks old, she laid her palm flat on her mother's collarbone, and the faint pale green of the marshlight ran up Miren's arm to her own small fingers and back down, and Andra, who was holding the boy, watched without surprise, and said only, "Well, of course." They called the boy Arin, after no one in particular. They called the girl Cressa, after Miren's grandmother. On the evening of the first full summer, Kaelin and Miren walked down from the keep to the medicine house under the eaves of which, a year and a half earlier, a still-room girl had been asked what she dreamed of when the wind came down from the mountains. The low stone bench was still there. The climbing jasmine had come back for the season, and the air smelled the way it had smelled the first night he had taken her hand and pressed it to the inside of his wrist. Kaelin sat down on the bench and drew her down beside him. He laid his hand over the silver and green claiming mark at her collarbone, and she laid her hand over the matching one at his throat. From the inner pocket of her dress, she drew a folded square of paper, yellowed at the edges. The ink inside it faded from having been carried through a gray cloak and a winter and a long, quiet spring. "I never sent this," she said. "I know. Andra told me where you kept it. You have not read it." "No. I was waiting for you to give it to me." She put it into his hand and closed his fingers around it. "Read it later. Tonight. After the children are down." "I will." "You never did answer me," he said, a moment later. "Answer you what?" "What you dream of when the wind comes down from the mountains." Miren thought about it for a long moment, and she looked down across the courtyard, where, on the low grass, Valor Thrun was sitting with an infant in each arm and pretending to be put upon, while Andra laughed at him from the kitchen door. "I dream of this," she said. Kaelin closed his eyes. "Good," he said. "Good. So do I." Above them, the first stars were coming out over the northern reaches, and under the eaves of the medicine house of Oristane, the Alpha Heir and his quiet one sat with their hands on their mated marks, and the bond between them, which had been tested, broken, hunted, and finally sealed, settled in for the life they were about to have. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.